are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We are Vineyard.
So we were like, oh, let's go check out the Vineyard. We went on the first Sunday, and it was this church of a couple hundred people maybe. And there was this young teenage girl, 19 years old or whatever, with an acoustic guitar singing some Misty Edwards songs, this intimacy with Jesus kind of worship. And I just cried my eyes out.
Yeah.
We heard a message and it was good. And we had people who came up and gave us a prophetic word, but it was not weird. It was just like, they were like, oh, I kind of feel like God is saying this. And does this make sense to you? And then at the end of it, one of the elders of the church, he invited me to go over to his house. He was starting a small group where we were going to be talking about Dallas Willard, like a book by Dallas Willard. And it was like extraordinary moment where everything clicked into place. And I was like, this is where I belong.
Yeah.
Like, these are my people. This is home for me somehow. Because these are people who want to do all the stuff, the Holy Spirit stuff, but they're not weird about it. These are people who like books and want to know not just theology, but philosophy. They want to understand the world in this really profound way, but they're also like really normal people. And I just remember we left that church service and we went for a walk just to talk about what we felt. And I was so emotional as I was talking to Carly, my wife, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this, but I feel like this is home.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathick, talks with Marshal Prewitt. Marshal is the lead pastor of the Vancouver Vineyard Church in Washington State and serves as Vineyard USA's regional leader for the Northwest region. Let's listen in.
Marshal, thank you so much for joining me on our We Are Vineyard podcast. You were mentioning earlier, you've listened to a bunch of them. You know the drill.
Gosh.
You're excited.
This is like the highlight. This is my Everest, is being on this podcast.
Oh,
I've
man.
listened to every episode.
Oh, my
I know
goodness.
everybody's backstory. I know who met a hippie in the woods, all this crazy stuff in the background.
Well, it's funny because, now that we're right now in the season, we're going around through all the regionals. And what's been interesting is how many folks who I've done interviews with are like, man, it's really helped me in our region even, because people know my story. They'll meet them and they'll know their story. Or different folks have been using it like, hey, here's who I am. If you have an hour you want to burn while you're doing the treadmill or whatever, this will save us a little time when we get together. So anyway, it's interesting to see how people connect to stories, and it helps them bridge a gap, be able to be together or whatever. So it's been interesting.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. So let's start where any good story begins, which is where you were born and where you grew up.
I was born in the middle 1980s in Portland, Oregon, downtown Portland, Oregon.
Nice.
Ironically, in a hospital on Marshall Street. It has nothing to do with my name, but everything
Amazing.
about my life from the beginning just felt destined to be.
I am destined to be a marshal. Good, great,
Exactly.
perfect.
And so, but I was born in Portland, Oregon, but right after that, my folks who are from the Pacific Northwest, they just wanted to go have an adventure. They wanted to live somewhere else. So the early part of my childhood was actually spent down in Southern California. So, yeah, it was wonderful and, a great place to grow up as a kid.
Which part of SoCal?
It was down in Riverside County. So,
Okay.
a little bit inland in Southern California.
And you said that they wanted to go have an adventure. So what did they do for work? What afforded them let's just go there?
Yeah. So my parents, they grew up in sort of like a rural town outside of Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And they were high school sweethearts.
And
my dad was this really good, gifted drummer that won all kinds of awards and scholarships and everything. So right after high school, he moved down to go to Southern California College, which is now Vanguard University.
Yep.
And my mom just wanted to get out of the rain. And so she went down with him. And after they were down there for a while during college, they moved back up. And that's when they got married. And then they had me and then my sister as well. But I think that they were determined to try to get back down to California as soon as they could. And so they just, my dad took a job doing like sports surfacing. So like tennis courts and running tracks and basketball gyms.
There
and all
are
that sort
so
of
many jobs, aren't there? It's like, I never thought somebody has to do that. I guess
somebody has to do it.
Yeah.
Exactly. But they were also, my dad was also still a musician. And so when when they were still up here in the Northwest, they were part of like a sort of regional traveling praise band that would go like, this is the 80s, man. So they would go to all the churches, they would do the conferences, they would play their gigs and everything. There's a band called Heaven Song, which is like every praise band in the late 1980s was named Heaven Song.
It's perfect.
And so,
it's a great name. Heaven Song, traveling praise band, resurfacing, tennis courts, basketball courts, just like, because somebody's got to do that, I guess.
Because somebody's got to do it. It's a good job to have. and it was enough to get them, to afford them the opportunity to move down to California.
Dude, that's incredible. And so church life for you was a big part of life.
Man, okay, so I have like the different story than most people that you interview. I'm like a church kid all the way through and through. Like
Great.
From the beginning, very beginning, my parents were in all the church stuff. And, I mean, you probably, I don't know how familiar you were with what evangelical world was like in the early 1990s.
Well, I mean, it's, I mean, I just heard, I'm sure you've heard it. If you've not heard it, you would love it. Nate Bargatze, who's a stand-up comedian, if you've not heard Nate, he's like very, very good. And he has this whole bit on how his parents were Christians in the early 90s. They had just come to Christ. And he says, I think that the early 90s were when Christians were the very most Christian they can be.
So that is exactly my world that I grew up in. I mean, like everything. Like this podcast recording is for all of the church kids who haven't deconstructed, but like never walked away from their faith. Like they finally have, like me and Julie Yoder are their podcast episodes.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. Yeah. So, but you're not just in the evangelical thing. It's also a charismatic like deal. So it's like praying all night and worshiping and is it all okay?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So we were Assemblies of God, and and it was really amazing. And it was the early 90s in Southern California. It was like renewal was happening, all the cool stuff. And so, I mean, on a typical weekend, we would have 2 or 3 services in the morning. We would have an evening service. There would be worship band practice on Tuesday night, and Awana or Royal Rangers on Wednesday night, and home group on Thursday night, and probably some kind of outreach on Friday night.
Sure.
It was all the things. And, on top of all of that, my parents, they loved Jesus so deeply, and they wanted to do everything they wanted to be so godly and raise their kids so godly. So, I mean, we were just, as a family, beholden to every church world thing imaginable. We were like, started out homeschooling until that didn't work out for a little bit. Then it was private school. Then it was back to homeschool. It was like, I wasn't allowed to watch the Ninja Turtles because the rat does yoga. It was all of the arbitrary rules that made no sense. But they were just following whatever Dr. James Dobson told them to do.
Precisely. And if it's nothing, it's sincere.
It's sincere, and it ruined my childhood. So sincere.
It sincerely ruined my childhood. I love it. Okay. So let's just back up just one more second, because I'm curious about this. So were your folks raised in like a church Christian home too?
That is a little bit of a complicated story.
So is it? Okay.
My dad's parents, my grandparents, they came to faith when my dad was, a child.
Okay.
Kind of, I don't know exactly when, but sometime when he was a kid, and they got pretty into church world when they got saved. But my dad, he was just sort of a typical go to parties, play drums, do the teenage stuff kind of guy.
Okay.
My mom, she came from a decidedly not Christian family. They're going to listen to this podcast, so I can't disclose more. But there's like a lot there.
Oh, come on! They want you to. They want you to.
Yeah,
no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So, you don't have to. You don't have to.
It was a weird time to have parents who were very into the 60s. We'll say.
Well, okay. So here's what I want to say about that. That's why I asked, because I would definitely be in this vein personally, and I do feel this. There's something about a first generation believer that is trying extra hard. I don't know. I mean, and I'm naming myself in this, if I'm honest. Whereas I meet people that are second or third or fourth that are in that came from, I mean, no family's perfect, but they came from stability. Like, no, we just love the Lord and we did our best to be a family, and there's always tragedy, there's always pain, there's always losses. So nobody lives perfectly. But there's something about multi-generational stability that is less prone to the trying too hard problem. If that makes sense. It's just I don't know how else to say it, but that was going to be my hunch. My hunch was I bet they were trying really hard because it's still pretty fresh generationally. They're not drawing as easily from their own history. So those kinds of people, and I would include myself in that, are more prone to the intense, this is the way it's got to be kind of thing. If you've been in a fairly stable, real life with God, I mean, frankly, even a stable Catholic, mainline, we just love the Lord and we pray and we're kind to each other and we forgive each other and we have meals and all of a sudden coming through the door is super intense evangelical thing. You're no thanks. We're fine. We don't I mean, right. And I mean, it's fine. They'd be yeah, that's cool. That's probably helpful. Those are helpful thoughts. But that no, man, we're all in. Every night we're doing the thing and our kids got to be in the right. That kind of hyper focus tends to not infect people that have a little more consistently over generations. They have more consistency. That's just really interesting to me. So you're raised in that, and then you say it ruined my childhood. And when you mean it ruined, it just was weird. It was just weird, and I mean, as a but at the time, it doesn't feel weird. You're dude, we are.
No, it totally felt weird, my friend.
It did it.
Well, I mean, because it was because here's the thing, your friends and all of the people that you're interacting with, they're just normal kids, right? And they're doing
they're
fun,
watching movies, doing whatever, right?
And it wasn't we were so weird that we were some separate sect that was,
right.
Not using electricity or something like that.
Right.
We would still watch movies. We would still do the things, but we were, I don't know how to say it. I mean, there were just these arbitrary lines that nobody else saw but that we would bump up against,
Yep.
And, on top of being Christian in the 90s, all of the James Dobson stuff, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
We were also super charismatic. And so it's everything that had to do with, anything that had to do with witches or any kind of spiritual darkness or stuff, my friends would watch these movies and I would be no, we watched a witch get delivered at church, or something like that.
Right. And they'd be what? Right.
Yeah, exactly. And, you just sort of grow up I guess this is normal.
Yeah, but, that's right. You only know your own life. Right.
Exactly. So, and we just did all the things. It was great. We did, have you ever heard of that play, Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames? This is back in the 90s. This is one of those evangelism plays that they would put on in churches and stuff. And so, I mean, this is just like part of my world. We did this twice at two different points in my childhood where I would,
Wait, you're in the play?
Yeah, like our family's in the play. And it's one of those plays where there's like all these vignettes, right? All the vignettes of like some teenagers get
who's
drunk
partying and
they're partying, they die, they're standing before the judgment seat.
Oh yeah, totally.
Wondering why nobody told them about Jesus.
Yes.
And so my family, the first time, they were like the good Christian family. I mean, we were just like the poster family. And so we got to rejoice and go into heaven, and it was all great. But then we did it a second time, like a couple of years later, and I watched my mom, night after night, pretend to drink herself to death and then get dragged to hell by the demons. This is just like our childhood.
This is called living. Yeah. I love it. Well, no, when I did some youth stuff, there was a hell house we went to during Halloween. And I was like, that was like an eye-opening experience. Like, wow, this exists. There's people that build all this in a field, and youth group after youth group comes. I was like, I don't know. I don't understand. This is like a different world. I could tell I stepped into a different world. Like, oh, there's like a way people do this like all the time. So yeah, I've only visited that world, but you lived.
I lived in
that
world. And you know what? Like, as much as there are these kind of hilarious things to think about in hindsight now, like, it was honestly, I'm not one of those people that came away with 1 million pounds of baggage. I actually kind of thought that it was, there was a lot of funkiness in it, but there was also some real beauty in the way that I experienced it.
Totally. Well, and it's done in faith, and it's sincere. There's ways people do that stuff that's hypocritical and lying, but then there's ways people are actually sincere in the way they're doing that stuff that I really appreciate, because they honestly love people and they're really want them to know about Jesus. And there's something really beautiful about that, I think. But I can see how it's confusing as much as it is helpful. Okay. So we got all that. When you're getting out of high school, are you thinking to yourself, what? I'm going to do what? I'm going to be a what? What are you thinking professionally? How are you thinking about school? What's the next step?
Well, I mean, so getting to that point, we moved back up from Southern California in the 1995.
Okay.
When I was still like at the end of elementary school.
Oh,
and then
okay.
We like joined the old Assemblies of God church my parents were part of way back when, but then we moved to Vancouver, and that's where we were at an Assemblies of God church up here in Washington. And, there's all the normal church stuff, but I was a part of like Assemblies of God world. And there's something so profoundly amazing about the way that the Assemblies of God envisions their young people. And so I was like extremely lucky, because when I was in junior high, our church is a small town church. They hired this incredible youth pastor, Chris Schneider, and his wife, Heather. And they were like real deal disciple making youth pastors.
Wow.
And it was, and we just sort of took it for granted, but he started this thing called morning discipleship. And it was every morning before school at 6:30 in the morning, a group of like junior high kids their parents would drop them off at the church, and we would do Bible study for an hour every single morning. We would read scripture, or we do like Blackaby's Experiencing God or something like that. And then we would learn, how to pray just for 15 minutes by him just kind of sending us off to pray. And we did that every day. And then he would drive us to school, and we'd just go about our day. It was 5 days a week. And it was like just building into us these powerful rhythms. And it came out of his heart, which just loved Jesus more than anyone I think I've ever met. I mean, he just loved Jesus.
Wow.
I had this really profound experience. One time we were doing like one of those lock-in kind of nights as a youth group, all at our youth pastor's house, and it was crazy. We stayed up all night, and I remember getting up to go to the bathroom at like 5 a.m. Everybody's exhausted, like just out. And I walked past his office, and I just saw him in a rocking chair, rocking back and forth, and just spending time with Jesus. And I was like, You mean this guy like does it not when we're at church? Like he does this all the time. He loves Jesus like that.
Wow.
And it marked me so profoundly, because I was like, that's like somebody I think I want to be like. The church world is fun, but like there's something that's bigger than church world. It's like he knows God, you know?
So great. Wow.
And so when it was around that time, I was like just getting to high school, and we went to the summer camp. And if you've ever been to like summer camp with the Assemblies of God, it's like at some point, nearly everybody receives some kind of call to ministry, you know? So if you like have fun at youth group, you want to be a youth pastor. If you're like a little bit artsy and angsty, you'll want to be a worship leader. But if you're serious about your faith, if you really want to go all in, man, then missions is like the pinnacle thing you want to do. And one night at a youth camp when I was, I think 14, I had this experience where I felt like the Lord put on my heart something to do with ministry, something to do with missions or something, but he said, I'm going to go ahead and use your life. And it had never really occurred to me before that night. And it might sound kind of silly to say, but it's never not been the only thing on my mind since that night.
Wow.
Like, you know, you dream about becoming a lawyer. That was what I kind of thought I wanted to do. Or you might want to be a firefighter or something like that. You watch Top Gun, you want to be an Air Force pilot.
Yeah. At least for a week. Yeah. Right.
At least for a little bit.
Yeah.
But there was just this moment that God got a hold of my heart, and he said, I want you to serve me for the rest of your life. Wow. And I went home from that experience, and, you know, I was just sort of like a typical annoying junior hire that was, you know, kind of made friends by kind of making fun of people and had a little bit of that sharp tongue. And I just remember getting home from that experience and going in my yearbook and finding all of these phone numbers of people that I had gone to school with and calling every single one of them and saying, you know, I was a Christian before. Everybody knew I was a Christian before, but I called them all and I said, I'm different now. I'm going to live a different way now. And I'm so sorry about the way that I treated you. I'm so sorry for the way that I have been. Will you please forgive me?
Wow.
And it set me on a whole new course.
Wow. There's a lot to say about that. So you come home and look at your parents and go, I need to tell you something that happened.
That was actually a surprisingly difficult conversation, because you would think, with my parents being, you know, really mega Christians and everything, that that like their highest dream would be that their son would go to Afghanistan and lay his life down for Jesus or something. But I didn't realize this at the time. Now, with, you know, years of hindsight, I can put the pieces together. Part of my parents' experience of being in church world so intensely is that they were wounded deeply, like 100 times by the church, and that there was a lot of unfulfilled sort of expectations or dreams of their life that just, you know, walls would get hit or doors would shut. And for some reason, when I was 14 and I felt this thing on my life and I shared it with them, and I was a little nervous to do so, but I think that my memory is that it seemed to touch a bit of a nerve in particularly in my dad, I think. And at least my experience of that moment was that this was something that was not his favorite thing for my life.
Right.
He never communicated that. He was an incredible dad of always really supporting me whenever I wanted to kind of go in this direction. But I kind of felt like there was a little bit of this.
There's a flinch, right? Yeah.
Yeah, flinch. That's a really good way of saying it. I felt like there was a little bit of a flinch.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you can only tell now, however many years later, oh yeah, that makes sense, given some of this other mess. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I've got like a whole bunch of open nerves that my teenage kids will one day be able to make me flinch, you know?
It is, well, I mean, the great quote from all the people in family systems is, your family knows how to press your buttons because they helped install them. Mm-hmm. So, like, family does have a way of accessing stuff that other people don't access quite as easily. And that's a gift to us there's a way for us to work that out with Jesus. Okay, so then you're graduating. You're like, I'm going to go to Bible college. I'm going to go on the mission field. What are you going to do?
So again, great question. I'll backtrack a tiny bit.
This
is taking forever.
No, it's great.
So I hit this wall in the middle of high school where I finally was like frustrated with the Assemblies of God, because for all of the amazingness that at least at the church I was in, all the amazingness of Holy Spirit stuff and whatever else, the sort of theological underbelly of it was like very thin. Mm-hmm. And I wanted something that was more robust. Now, at the same time, there was this Baptist church that was right next to our high school. And there was this girl, who went to
here
that
it
church.
is. Yep.
She was one of the pastor's daughters, and so I found myself wandering over to her youth group.
Yep.
And
which I'm sure was quite a bit different.
It was totally different, and
exactly.
And I was like this total fish out of water, and I felt bewildered to be in such a familiar environment and to be such an outsider. Yeah. But I made this incredible relationship with the youth pastor there, Michael Buving, one of the best youth pastors in the world. I'm such a big fan of that guy. And so I started attending that youth group in that church. And while I was there, I just kept bumping up against sort of these, they weren't invisible walls. Like I knew where the live, electrical fences were essentially. Right. And I couldn't resist just going and hitting them all the time. Right. And so it just made for a pretty like weird and contentious time of being a part of this youth group. But there were leaders in the church that were somewhat actively resistant to me and to this relationship that I had with the pastor's daughter. And that was something that just ended up kind of instilling in me a weird chip on my shoulder, where I just felt like this anger at local church world because I didn't fit in over here, and I didn't fit in this church now either. And God's got a call in my life, and everybody knows it, but like, it's just, this place sucks, and I don't like what's happening here. So by the time that I graduated high school, my whole vision of life was like, I just want to go like have adventures with God. I want to go like to the nations. I want to be the Anthony Bourdain of church world. Dude, like
that is a great vision, by the way. Who doesn't want to do that? That's awesome. Who doesn't
want to do that?
Right? Yeah, totally. Totally.
And at the same time, I didn't have any money, so we went
small
to community
problem.
College.
Yeah. Right.
So I went to community college and stuff, and just was like a youth leader in our local youth group. And my old youth group at the Assemblies of God Church, my youth pastor, he calls me up one day. He says, "Hey, could you take our youth group to this conference? Could you be like a leader that just helps take them to this conference?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I take, I don't know, it was like probably 15 or something kids to this conference in Portland. And I knew nothing about it. And it was so weird. It was like out there renewal, but like in kind of the wrong ways. Not right. Yeah, you know what I mean. I'll say it wrong ways. Yeah. And I found myself feeling like this uneasiness of, I'm responsible for these kids, and this is like a really bizarre space. And so I sat there the second morning in the back of the church watching what was happening. And I said, "Okay, God, if you're here, I'm going to ask you to give me like a sign? Could you give me a sign? These are all charismatic people. So could you give me a prophetic word that confirms that you've called me to some kind of leadership? And then could you confirm that there's something to do with like missions or the nations or something like that? And then could you also confirm, I had been feeling like he was saying something to me about going to New Zealand, which I didn't know anything about New Zealand. I said something about New Zealand. And then I pointed to a guy in the second row and I said, could that guy be the guy that says it to me? And I gave God that ultimatum in total frustration.
Yeah.
Well, like 3 minutes later, the guy from the second row goes up on stage and he grabs the microphone. And it turns out he's the speaker for the morning. And he's, kind of winding down worship. The Lord is here. Let's just settle in for a minute. Everyone go back to your seats. And then he pauses for a moment and he looks right at me. And then he says, "You, what's your name?" And he then proceeds to give me a prophetic word where he says, you're called to lead in the church. And he said, and I see this picture of a passport and its pages are being flipped and nations are being stamped. He said, I think that there's something to do with nations for you.
Wow.
And then he pauses for a minute and then he says, and I never do this, but I feel like God is saying that you're supposed to come to my home nation of New Zealand.
Wow.
And I just crashed to the floor and started sobbing.
I bet.
And it was this profound experience. And so I exchanged numbers with that guy at the end of the service. And a few months later, I found myself flying out to New Zealand to be his intern.
How old are you when this happens?
I was 19.
So you're 19 at community college.
Yep.
Just sort of kind of just fumbling around. I mean, it's not bad, but there's no real track.
No track.
You have this thing in your mind. I want to be the Anthony Bourdain of the kingdom. But what I find interesting is you were still willing to serve and you allowed yourself to be put into environments where things might happen.
Yeah. So, and that's a funny thing, right? I was too jaded to go down the track. But I was still hungry and looking for the opportunity, looking for the door, whatever it was, and just, and it opened. And so I fly to the other side of the world. And this is back in 2007, I think. And so like many churches didn't even have websites or anything. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I just flew to the other side of the world and was like, this guy knows who I am. So I guess I should go follow him.
So back up just a second. You have parents, you have friends. Does anybody raise a flag and go, hey, man, I don't know that you should fly to New Zealand right now? Like, that doesn't seem wise. Or because of the prophetic nature of it all, is everyone like, well, I don't know. It sounds like God. But I mean, nobody raises a hand?
Okay, so I don't remember because when I was 19, I wasn't going to listen to anybody. I don't know. I don't remember if they said anything.
So they may have, but you don't recall because who cares? I don't even care what they think.
Who cares? It's like, whatever. And, that's like what you do when you're young.
Marshall, not everybody. I mean, maybe, but maybe not. I mean, like, if that happened in your church, just imagine. I mean, you're leading a church now. 19-year-old comes up and goes, you're not going to believe this. I was at this prophetic conference. This guy prophesied over me, and I'm flying to, wherever, like the Congo.
Yeah, okay.
You would be like, well, hold on a second. Like, what? What? I'm sorry, what is this? And who's that? And what are you going to be doing? And for how long? And do you have any money? Like, how are you going to do that? I mean, you would.
Yeah. No, everything you're saying makes total sense. And there were probably a lot of people that were saying that.
But you just don't recall it. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I just didn't have any. I didn't. If I did hear somebody say something like that, I just didn't listen to it. I didn't.
You would have been like, yeah, okay. Well, thanks for checking in.
Well, because this is the Lord, and this is what we do.
Dude, I love it.
We're radical for Jesus.
I love it.
And so I fly to the other side of the world, I don't have a phone number. I don't have an address. I don't know anything. The church changed names in the months that before I got
and
there.
by the way, you've never flown on planes before to like other parts of the world. I mean, you're 19.
Never to that far. I mean, like Central America and stuff like that, but that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you've at least done some things.
Done mission trips. Yeah. Like I mentioned, I'm a total church kid, done all the things. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Okay. But this is a different level. Okay. So now you just drop into a city.
And I literally like just take a bus to the Starbucks. I don't have a phone number or anything. I just start to pray. And I'm like, God, nobody knows I'm here. Like here, they know I'm here, but they don't know where I am. And the prophetic guy shows up in his car 15 minutes to pick me up. Like, he's like, oh, good. Here, you're at Starbucks. It's because we didn't arrange, like I got delayed on my plane. So we didn't know where we were going to find each other. He found me at Starbucks. This is the guy that I'm supposed to. So it's all the confirmation, right?
Dude.
Until the first night that we start church and we go to an evening service, and it was an out there church. It was real wild. It was fun, but it was wild.
But like, okay, so like, for the uninitiated, when you'd say wild, like imagine there's a video camera in the room. What am I seeing?
Okay, so the first night, they like after worship, they invite the youth pastor to come up, and they want to just pray for him and bless him.
Yeah.
And they put their hands on him and they start praying for him. And as soon as they start praying for him, his whole like face and neck start jerking back and forward. And I thought to myself, this is amazing. This church hired a guy with Tourette's. Like there's
so it's like a chicken almost. Yeah,
exactly. Right. It looks like that. And that wasn't that weird. Like I kind of had seen that, but then shortly after that, it's the fire tunnels. It's the
wait. Back up. What's a fire tunnel? Describe this.
So it's like leaders on that form kind of a tunnel on either side, and people
so they put their hands up like a tunnel,
and then they pray for people who go through the tunnel, and everybody's herking and jerking, and it's
crying,
cool.
Screaming, shouting.
Which again, it wasn't like that was my experience. It wasn't like totally outside of anything I'd ever seen before. I kind of had a category for it, but it was when the preacher was too drunk in the spirit to stand up and was in a wheelchair preaching, but then he would stand up and do a full baseball windup. Now, mind you, this is New Zealand. They don't play baseball, but he knew how to do a baseball windup to be able to throw a fireball, which means an invisible Holy Spirit energy ball at somebody in the congregation.
And they'd be like, whoa, right, whole thing.
And again,
that's pretty wild. This is like out of a movie.
I'm not trying to be rude or anything here. This was what I was experiencing.
You literally watched it. Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
And, it was one of those places where somebody would get up and give announcements and say, we're going to have a women's retreat. And then somebody in the back would start blowing a shofar and, everybody would shout. It was fun. It was just different than everything I've ever experienced.
Yeah, I'd say. Yeah.
And I'm on the opposite side of the world, and I'm just kind of like, well, I guess is what we're going to do. But the thing about this internship is that it was rooted in sort of like the 24/7 prayer movement.
Right.
So my internship involved me being in a prayer room for 30 hours a week.
Wow.
And so as much as like there was kind of the fun, wild Pentecostal renewal stuff going on, and that was a trip, what I was there for was to encounter the intimacy of Jesus. And it was, and I remember at the first week of being there being like, I have no idea, what's going on with all the rest of this stuff, but I am going to go 100% all in to whatever this prayer room thing is. So day one, I get to the prayer room and I pray everything that I can imagine praying,
within like an hour.
Every person I've ever met. Well, within like 15 minutes. I mean, and then I was just like, oh my gosh,
now what?
Now?
Yeah, right.
And that's where I began to learn about lingering in God's presence and being slow and chewing on the Word of God, not just reading the Bible. And it was so deeply formative for me that that I never would have imagined at 19 years old, with all of the energy that I had, being able to sit for 4 hours with Jesus and being so moved by him. And yeah, there were plenty of moments of boredom, but it was a profoundly beautiful experience for me, and it shaped me. And then we would do ministry training and stuff too, and so we would learn, scripture. We'd memorize a ton. We would go out and do lots of street evangelism. I remember prophesying and praying for healing in the mall and sharing my faith. Some of us more radical guys would go down to the sketchy parts of Wellington, and we would minister to like prostitutes and stuff, and we would try to take care of them, get them to a safe place. Just all the kinds of great, amazing ministry things. But at the core of it was intimacy with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so after a while of being there, and it was a really amazing experience, I came back home, and because I was going to get engaged to that pastor's daughter. And so my high school sweetheart, Carly, we were, determined we were going to get married. And our plan was to move back to New Zealand. Even though that church world was outside of our framework, we were going to be a part of sort of the international house of prayer ministry type thing in New Zealand. And we were going to be itinerant ministers because forget the local church, man. I still don't trust it. I think it's a mess. These people are whatever, you know what I mean? I don't want to be part of the local church. I just want to be like an itinerant guy, and it'll be awesome and exciting, and we'll travel all over and do the adventure life. And so when we moved home, we got engaged, and then 6 months later we got married. And when we had just got married and our whole lives were in front of us and we were praying, we kind of had this unsettled feeling of, maybe we're not supposed to go to New Zealand. And we didn't know what that was about. So we were like, well, you know what? Let's just go to Kansas City. Let's go be a part of the house of prayer in Kansas City. And that'll be awesome. It'll be the prayer room, and it's going to be amazing. We're going to be part of this end times movement. It's going to be fantastic. So we pack up everything we own. We put it in a U-Haul. We moved down to Kansas City from the Portland area. And as soon as we got there, every door slammed shut in my face. Like, I'm church golden boy, preach in the youth group, never lacked an opportunity in ministry my whole life. And all of a sudden, for the first time, nobody knows who I am. Nobody cares that I'm there. There's no opportunities. I'm working a crappy job at a Whole Foods, and just like, what am I doing here? And my experience of being in that environment where I'm around all of these incredible Christians, and it's not like a local church, it's like a sold out, fire up ministry kind of thing.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm like, but nobody cares that I'm here.
Wow.
Nobody even knows my name.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make any difference if I just left.
Wow.
And it was in that season that God started to address some of the wounds that were in my heart. Because I realized that even though I didn't trust the local church, what people need more than an exciting prophetic person is they need a pastor.
Yeah.
They need relationships with people who are following Jesus together. And now my wife, she was having a blast. She was like experiencing God. She was weeping in the prayer room. She was having a great time. But we were only there for about 6 months before we were like, I think that our time here is done. This is not everything we thought it was going to be. We should just move home so that she could do grad school. And the irony, and I don't mean this in any way disparagingly, of these people who were sold out, fired up Christians, these people who didn't know me, didn't know my birthday, didn't care at all, that as soon as we said, well, I think we're going to move home now, they all said, well, we don't feel like that's what God is saying to you. We think you're supposed to stay here. And it was this really hard pill of these people who didn't know me enough to have coffee with me while I was there are suddenly expected to have a voice in my life to tell me what not to do. And that was just a hard thing. But we were just like, it's time to go home. So we moved back tail between our legs. We had a goodbye party when we moved to Kansas City, and then we're moving home 6 months later, and it was so humiliating.
Yeah.
And when we got back, we were just like, well, where are we going to land? Where, did this Assemblies of God thing, did this Baptist thing. I went to New Zealand to this crazy charismatic thing. And we prayed and we just said, well, we know some people over at this church down the street called the Vineyard. We could go check that out. We went on the first Sunday, and it was this church of, a couple hundred people maybe. And there was this young teenage girl, 19 years old or whatever, with an acoustic guitar, singing some Misty Edwards songs, this intimacy with Jesus kind of worship. And I just cried my eyes out.
Yeah.
And then we heard like a message, and it was good. And we had people who came up and like gave us a prophetic word, but it was not weird. It was just like, they were like, oh, I kind of feel like God is saying this. And does this make sense to you? And then at the end of it, they, one of the elders of the church, he invited me to go over to his house. That he was starting up a small group where we were going to be talking about Dallas Willard, like a book by Dallas Willard. And it was like this extraordinary moment where everything clicked into place. And I was like, this is where I belong.
Yeah.
Like, these are my people. This is home for me somehow, because these are people who want to do all the stuff, like all the Holy Spirit stuff, but they're not weird about it. And these are people who like read books and want to know not just theology, but philosophy. They want to understand the world in this really profound way, but they're also like really normal people. And I just remember we left that church service and we went for a walk just to talk about what we felt. And I was so emotional as I was talking to Carly, my wife, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this, but I feel like this is home.
Yeah.
And so we joined the church. Now, there were like almost no people our age. It was a lot of older people and some teenagers. And so we felt this like kind of weird confusion about being there, because we wanted to be part of something that was like big and dynamic. And
right. Well, that's what you've been doing. Yeah. You've been showing up where there's excitement. Yeah. Right.
Exactly. And instead we found ourselves with some like very wonderful, like low key friends who were just some of the most committed like friends I've ever met in my life. And they just wanted to share everything in our lives together. And we had these older people who were like mature, and they had done all the radical things. They were part of the Jesus movement. They led communes and all the things. And they were there to just kind of gently walk us through sort of the transition of displaced, passionate, rootless people into established, healthy, mature followers of Jesus without pouring any water on our passion. They just helped us to kind of find a place for it.
That's so great.
It was amazing.
Wow.
And so while we were there, we were just kind of serving, and, people kept coming up to us and saying, hey, you should bring more young people to our church. And we were like, how? And they said, we don't know. We just need you to do it. And so, my wife and I, along with our good friends, Joel and Miranda, we started this young adults ministry, and it became one of the areas of the church that just started to grow. And we would have, at times 30 people in my tiny living room. And, we were just kind of doing Bible study stuff and sharing meals together and doing discipleship and doing ministry outreach kind of things and serving the poor. We were just doing things, and
so great.
And it never felt like this electric, like, oh my gosh, the hand of God is on us. It just felt like, well, this is like what we do. We just keep serving Jesus. We're just going to do like an all-night prayer meeting, and that's like what we do, And it was around that time that our church started to go through like a transition. And a transition is a nice way of saying like a nasty church split. And so our founding pastors, Steve and Lane Fish, some of the best people I know, they announced that they were going to be retiring in 3 years' time. And that wasn't enough to stop about half the leaders from leaving. They left anyway.
Wow.
And my first ever leadership team meeting that I was invited to, because we were like leading this small group and stuff, we go to this leadership team meeting. The first one I ever went to, there were a bunch of people up front that I had never seen before. And it turns out that one of them was our area leader. One of them was Tri Robinson, who was good friends with Stephen Lane. And then one of them was our regional leader, Rose Sweatman. And they opened the meeting before there was a prayer or anything with Tri Robinson announcing that no one was going to fire Steve today. And I was like, what?
Oh, what does this mean?
What have I got myself into? And I was like thrown into this embroiled church world insanity. You know what I mean?
Wow. Oh, I trust me, I do. Yeah. I'm in a few of those. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so like that was our intro to church leadership. But it was really beautiful to see this handful of like non-anxious, mature leaders who did everything. I mean, I watched them. They did everything right. They followed up with every single person who was wounded and angry. They prayed. They sought reconciliation. They tried to walk with people the best they could. And at the end of the day, you know, these leaders left. But I can confidently tell you that as painful as that was, the leaders of our church shone so beautifully in my eyes. And so it was around that time that we were like, okay, well, we've got 3 years until the pastor and his wife, Stephen Lane, the pastors of our church, are going to transition out. We need to find a new pastor. And so we thought that it was going to be one of our sort of elders in the church. He was going to step up and take that role. And then my wife, one day after I had the opportunity to preach, and it was a mediocre sermon at best. Like it would be generous to call it mediocre. And she said, you know, the Lord told me that you're going to be the pastor of this church. And I thought that she was like she was being nice. You know, like, well, I believe in you, Marshall.
Yeah. That's nice of you. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I was
but she didn't mean it that way, I bet. Yeah.
No, she didn't. And then a few weeks later, I got home from this backpacking trip, and we met as a leadership team. And the guy who was supposed to take over the church, he said he had gone out to a cabin to seek the Lord, and he said, you know, the Lord told me that I wasn't supposed to do this. I'm not the person for this responsibility. And then he turns to me and he says, I think that Marshall's supposed to be the guy.
Wow.
And everyone in the room started nodding emphatically. And then all of these like prophetic words started coming out. Oh, I had a dream about this. Oh, I've been feeling like the Lord's been saying this. God told everyone but me. Like literally, I was the last person to know that this was in the works. And so we took a couple of weeks, my wife and I, we prayed, we fasted, we sought God, and we felt like, yeah, you know what? We love this church. I don't know if I love the church, but we love this church and we love Jesus. And so I think we should do it.
Wow.
And so it set us on this course to become the pastors. But it was beautiful. It was this amazing transition where for about 3 years, I walked side by side with Stephen Lane. We had coffee every single week. We talked about my heart stuff. We talked about leadership stuff. We talked about stories of the good, the bad, all of it. So that by the time that we transitioned in as the lead pastors of the church, it was like the church was ready. We were as ready as we could be. And it just went really smooth.
Registration is now open for our 2024 Better Together Conference. Better Together is a Vineyard USA conference that seeks to thoughtfully discuss race, gender, reconciliation, and the multi-ethnic church while moving us intentionally towards being beloved community. This conference is for everyone. Even if you aren't a part of one of our formal associations, we would love to have you join as we grow together. Better Together will feature insightful plenary talks from dynamic national leaders, as well as multicultural worship led by a diverse group of worship leaders and musicians. Attendees will have an opportunity to attend workshops designed to equip and empower leaders to creatively champion kingdom diversity in their churches and communities. And each association will have a few specifically targeted workshops that are only for folks who are part of that association. It is only as we learn to better relate as sisters and brothers in Christ, dependent on the Holy Spirit, that we can be shaped into beloved community. If this excites you, we need you here at this conference. We are indeed better together. Check out the details on the Vineyard USA webpage or at bettertogether.vineyardusa.org. See you there.
There's so many things that are interesting about what you said. One being that the mess of your first leadership team meeting instilled you with confidence. And I think this is something we miss often as leaders. Like when we're leading in a messy moment, our assumption is, wow, everybody's just going to be thrown off, or
right.
It's going to make everybody wonder, what's the point of any of this? But the truth is, everybody knows the world's a mess. Okay, nobody's wondering about that. But when they watch people lead with character, integrity, care, peace, but are still really solid, courageous, they don't just give ground for no reason. Even if the outcome isn't great, because what I think is interesting about your story is it didn't end then with everybody holding hands and singing worship songs together. It ends with people being like, hey, we can't do this, we're out. So even with kind of a non-ideal outcome, the impression that's still left is confidence for you and strength.
Yeah.
And I think often we miss that. I'm of course, I'm with leaders all the time in the midst of messy stuff. And if you're trying to just manage outcomes, you're not thinking about who you are, how you're behaving, and how people are really watching. They're paying attention to the kind of person you are, not just sort of how smart you are and the moves you make, or is it savvy or something, but are you like an honest and generous and kind and compassionate person? And it's interesting to me to think that it was sort of in that space you're drawn toward, not away. That's pretty interesting to me. Like, that's not a common story. And then so much so that as the Lord makes it clear, you're like, yeah, sure, I think maybe we're called to do this.
Yeah, no, we were invited in at the height of it just not being good. But I mean, like I said, we were also watching the people who were really leading this thing, leading with such integrity and commitment. Yeah. And so as they were, inviting us to consider this call, they were also there's always the really encouraging stuff of the personal affirmation. We see this in you, we believe in you, blah, blah, blah. But it was even more than that. It was the commitment. It was and we will follow you, and we're going to be with you. And to have this like group of people with integrity where you're like, even if this church falls apart, it ends up with us 20. Yeah. These are 20 people that I could do life with. Yeah. These are 20 people that we could really do something together. Yeah. That was the thing that made me feel so excited about the possibility of doing it.
And so when you think, what year is that? How long ago was that when you were
so that would have been
put
around,
in charge?
So we were officially installed as the pastors in January of 2016.
Okay. Yep.
And that was a pretty great time. I mean, with everything leading up to that moment, it just felt healthy. It felt like things were starting to grow again. Like like there had been a prophetic word from a leader outside of our church that like the tree was going to get cut down to the stump, but a new tree would grow out of it. That was really feeling like it was happening. And then we got my wife and I, Carly and I, right before we were ordained, we got a word from our area leader. He said, we feel like God is saying that for the first year, you are going to be sort of in the safety of the wake that's left behind from the previous pastors. But after 1 year, you'll be out in the choppy waters of ministry, and you have to trust that the God who sustains Stephen Lane Fish will be the God who sustains you.
Wow.
Well, we didn't know what that meant, but the first year, I mean, it always feels hard when you're in it because you don't have anything to compare it to.
Right.
But it was pretty good.
Looking back, it was pretty smooth, right? Right.
It was pretty smooth.
Exactly.
And I mean, it was like 1 year to the day, literally to the day of after our ordination. Our son, who had just been born during that first year, our firstborn, he gets sick, and financial issues start coming up in our own lives and in our church, and there were like relationship problems, and it kept getting worse and worse until our son ended up being hospitalized. We were there for 7 nights, and he was diagnosed with this like extremely rare condition, and the prognosis was awful for him, and we were just broken. And at the same time, we're having people in the church who are mad at us, and in our small group who are mad at us, and people are leaving, and it was like just brutalizing in every way. And yet God's presence was still there, and that word sustained us through, and we got through it. And then it was like a perfect, up and to the right trajectory once we kind of got through that stretch of people coming to faith and leaders being developed, and everything great was happening, and we were like cruising, and I became an area leader, like everything, my evangelical fortunes were being restored. It was amazing. the life that God has always promised me,
right.
And I got to go to my first ever like leadership team meeting with the Vineyard in San Diego, California in March of 2020. Never felt more full of faith, never felt more excited for the future. And, 7 days later, the world changed.
COVID. Boom.
Exactly. And, I mean, that was like a thing that happened. That was not an easy time.
Still is happening, it feels like. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, not exactly the easiest time. But again, it was like, each time that something like this hit, and each time that we would experience sort of just the pain of ministry and life, and you feel like, man, this is so hard, this is so crushing. I could look around and I could see that same group of people from 2014, some of these same leaders who were there, and they were still committed to us. Yeah. And they were still bought in, and we were able to just keep going. And so God has been so faithful. It's amazing. It's been beautiful.
It's amazing.
And then here's another wrinkle. And this is like another thing that I've been thinking about just recently along my story. And that's that in 2020, we also had this incredible opportunity where my parents, they so generously offered to sell us their house. And so it was just this incredible gift. And Carly and I prayed about it, and we felt like it was the right thing to do. So we bought my parents' house. And now I'm, rocking my baby girl to sleep in my old bedroom, and it's this whole weird thing, right? Yeah. And what's strange about it is that there's so many things about this sort of like the prophetic trajectory of my life that has felt like, God has sort of tied up the loose ends. But there's also these strange, irreconcilable things of like, I was going to be Anthony Bourdain, I was going to be this, I was going to be this like, nations traveling prophetic guy, whatever. And I pause and I look around. I'm recording from the living room of the house I grew up in. Yeah. And I'm like, I literally could not be closer to where I started. And here I am, the guy who wanted to go to all the nations of the earth. And I'm like serving in the city that I grew up in. And I'm pastoring a church, which is like blocks away from the community college that I attended. And my family members attend my church, and my wife's family members attend our church. And it's where my whole angsty trajectory of I got to get away from the local church, and I got to get away from my hometown, and I need to go serve Jesus radically out there. And somehow he's planted me so firmly right where I started, but he's given us this like grace to be here.
Yeah.
And so there's these weird unresolved things, but that also it feels unresolved and also at the same time deeply settled. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Well, it's we all, sort of form in our minds the expectations of who we become and what we'll do and in what order. I mean, for no one does it work that way. But
right.
I mean, if you want to be a lawyer, it doesn't end up working that way. But all the more in this thing called ministry, especially local church pastoring, there's just too many variables. There's too much happening, let alone what the Lord intends to do. But what I find interesting about your story is how God effectively made you desperate for what it is to be in a local church. Mm-hmm. And then by the grace of God, you had an experience of the local church that was really life-giving, like connected, caring, stabilizing, while not disqualifying all the passions that you have. And that sucked you in. I mean, now you're all the way in. You're a local vineyard pastor, a regional leader in the vineyard. So I just think there's a lot of people that probably have that hunger, but have still not experienced a local church that offers life. And life in the way that you're describing, that's stabilizing.
Yeah.
I'm always nervous when pastors are trying to build churches like never-ending short-term mission trips.
Yeah.
Like if we just have the amazing conference and the amazing Sunday, and then we have the cool training program that ignites people to be the missionaries to their neighborhoods. And listen, I love all that stuff. I'm an activist. I'm evangelistic. I love church planting. I mean, I'm in for all of it. But man, the inspiring vision of a pastor that prays, that meets that young couple on their first Sunday and says, hey, we're doing this small group I think could really benefit your life. Mm-hmm. It's hard to describe what the texture of that is, how important that is to become that kind of person. But healthy pastors do eventually. Now, they should still also try to have a Holy Spirit retreat or whatever. I'm not saying it's not taking one thing off that's able, but it is creating a stabilizing force specifically for people around that age. That sort of 18 to 25, like, man, we want you to be everything, be all the things. And let's build a world where you can have a stable marriage, where you can raise your kids, where you work a job where you pay your bills. That's the power. I mean, if we had just hundreds and hundreds of churches like that, that's going to change things for people's lives. It repatterns. I mean, for me personally, it gives you hope that you can be in a family that's steady, that just loves you. Yeah. Making that sense of a place called home is not quite as sexy, but is really valuable.
Absolutely. I mean, when we were being invited into church leadership and involvement here in Vancouver, I was working for my dad, and my wife was going to grad school, and we had moved home, essentially giving up on the idea that we were going to do anything all that interesting, and but we still love Jesus, and maybe there's a church plant in the future or something like that. And it was just that intentional invitation, not with hype. You're gonna go be this, and this, but just hey, I really see something in you, and we just want to make room for that to be able to work itself out and see how it goes. And that's honestly like just the joy of my life as a local pastor now is to see that. And some of it is this fired up, excited energy that people have, and we want to make space for that and encourage that. But some of it is just restoring some of the vision from yesterday, and calling out what has been dormant. And then the other thing too is that, like, what was so radical about the vineyard for us was that these were intentionally normal people.
Yeah, right.
That weren't trying to go out and hype the world into a revival or something like that, but lived just very faithfully and healthily. Yeah. And then when my family joined the church too, it just kept everybody very real. Like, I can't not be myself when my mom is in the second row. Like people, I'd say. Or more so my brothers, they'll call me out if I'm not being myself. Yeah. And what that's done is it's created an environment where we have so many burnt out people who have been hurt in church world over and over and over again, or felt like things didn't work out or whatever, that have given up and that are frustrated, and they roll into our church and they're saying that this thing that I think is like the superpower of who we are in the vineyard, this thing is like refreshing. Yeah. It's refreshing to the souls of so many people who have gone and done all the things and just felt burnt out and weary from it, So good. So what would you want to say? Let's try to land the plane. You give me a lot of time, but if you could talk to, 22-year-old, I'm kind of tired and disappointed, out of my, maybe I'm not going to be Anthony Bourdain kind of Holy Spirit junkie. Like, what do you think you'd want to say to that? Because there's a lot of those people, to your point. There's a lot of people that were so excited about their life with God. They did all the things they knew how to do. And next thing you know, they're working in Whole Foods and they're not sure. Maybe they took a wrong turn somewhere. And how do I find my feet again? What would you want to say? Because that's a version of yourself that you could go back and talk to. What do you want to say? Because there's lots of people like that. Man, I mean, there's a lot that I'd want to say. Yeah. I would say that the thing that I needed to be reminded of the most, and that I would want to remind every single young 22-year-old person, is to remember who you were doing this for, that you're doing it for Jesus, and that he loves you, and that he's with you, and that the God of your youth is the God of your adulthood. He's the God of the first phase of life is going to be the God of the second and the third phases of life, and that he's everything. And not to lose sight of who Jesus is. Yeah. Because it's so easy to just kind of like get lost in all of the ministry stuff, or the this or the that, or church world or whatever, and lose sight of Jesus. And then from there, this is so obvious, but I would just say, stay. Find a place where you feel like you can belong, and let those roots start to go down a bit. Because we keep sort of looking for something intangible, running from place to place, that you're only ever going to find when you just choose to stay and to press through the difficulty. And when things do get difficult, to look up, and instead of seeing all the conflict and the people who are leaving and the people who are mad and all the fighting, and to let it confirm all of your worst fears about church world, if you just look up and you look around, you're going to see that there are some people around who are doing the real Jesus stuff. Yeah. And that those are people that you can do this with for a long, long time. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Well, and it builds a life, I mean, the amount of times I've watched, and I'm not saying this negatively, though it will sound negative, different folks who have been impacted in a parachurch world, a ministry, that the way they can kind of keep going in that is by joining that. So I moved from being a student to student leader to being on staff.
And that can be a wonderful track that God calls people to. So, but it can't be the only track, because there's just not enough spots on the bus for everybody to be on staff or whatever. And so many folks that have done that then find themselves sort of addicted or used to a certain way of living life with Jesus that works really well 19 to 25. Staying up all night, going out on the streets and flying to wherever, and everybody learns to play guitar and whatever. So there's that thing, which is great. By the way, 19 to 25-year-olds should do that. That's great.
100%. Yep.
But now you're 31. Now you're 34. I've got 2 small kids. I'm tired. And you start to wonder, does this make me less spiritual? Am I not as in love with Jesus as I was? And the thing that person needs is some elder to say, have you read this Dallas Willard book? You should read it with me. like I want all that stuff that God did with you then, but now you're in a bit of a different phase, and there's a different way of building, and there's a different way of strengthening. And it's usually in that window the local church makes the most sense, if it's not pretending to be a short-term mission trip.
Yeah.
It's being the church, where we help you think about being married and having kids and having a job and serving the poor in like a way that like fits a real life. And man, Marshall, hearing your story, what's so inspiring is somehow you made it through that gauntlet. But I'm aware, listening to you, how many people I bump into that had done YWAM or this other thing or that other thing, and it was so good for them. They grew in their life with God. They maybe even had stretched out a bit because they were on staff for a minute. So they added another 6 years to that, or 5 years, or even 10 years. But now they're looking around going, okay, I don't have a college degree. I don't have any job skills that I'm aware of. But man, I can lead a above average worship set on my own, and I could probably do a street drama, and I'm comfortable flying on planes and sleeping in hammocks. But that's not really a marketable job skill necessarily. But you found a way through because a local church was willing to do the steady, stable stuff and grabbed a hold of your life.
Yeah.
Man, that inspires me as a pastor to just keep being a good pastor.
Yeah.
Teach the Bible, be kind to people, have moments where you pray, invite people into your home, all the little things that stabilize people. It's a big deal, man.
Yeah. Pay attention to what you see in the people in front of you. Because there's so much, and there's so many people who disqualify themselves or quit early, and they just need a pastor to notice them. They just need a friend to notice them and to invite them back in. And that's I think that's where some of the gold of the church really lies right now, if we're just willing to do the work to mine it.
Yeah. That's really good.
And the other lesson is that I'm following Jesus in my late 30s. All of my siblings are following Jesus. They're raising their families to love Jesus, which just goes to show that everything that my mom did worked. Yeah. So the joke's on the rest of us, right? Well,
and it worked because, again, they did it with sincerity.
Exactly.
There's a way to do not as great things, but with true joy, true sincerity, and real integrity that the Lord honors. And then, and that gives me great comfort as a parent, because I'm sure we're doing a whole bunch of things wrong. But I think I can still say, and I believe it's true of my wife for sure, and I believe it's true of me, that we really are honestly trying to follow Jesus, like for real.
Yeah.
We're not playing a game. We're not like working an angle. We're not just trying to look nice for the neighbors or whatever, or for our church even. Mm-hmm. Like when nobody's around and, it's the end of a long day, we're still drawn to prayer.
Yeah.
We're still drawn to the scriptures. We're still drawn to each other.
Exactly.
To serve one another, figure out how to we don't get it right every day. There's plenty of times things are hard and we forget who we are and what we're doing. But by and large, that's the orientation of our life and our hearts. And it turns out that goes a long way over years and decades. And what a testimony to your family, your parents. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal. And I mean, to connect that dot, it wasn't any technique, it was integrity, right. And it was just a commitment to staying with this church, staying with it with these other people, and to find, we all need help and support. They found other adults and people to invest in us as kids as well. And all of that, it just happened within the context of the local church. And I'm amazed at the fact that I went from being so disenchanted with church world to now honestly believing that everything that we need, I think this is biblical. Everything that we need exists within the body.
Yeah. God
has given every gift and everything that we need within the local church. So I just believe in this thing.
Well, and it shows how it took you a minute to get there. Sometimes it takes a minute through our own really idealism. If this thing were amazing, it would be turning the city on its ear or whatever. And that's cool too. I want that. However, at the very least, it's a place where people find connection, care, prayer, support. At the very least, it can be that. And then, of course, God does show up and flip everything on its ear from time to time. But, man, it is that picture that Jesus gives. It's the salt, it's the light, it's the yeast of the kingdom that slowly works its way through the dough. Yeah, you think about if there were just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of churches and cities that were just doing that work. That changes things.
Yes.
It turns things in a city over time.
Yes.
And I know that's your heart. You're in a city and near a city that, you need a few hundred churches that'll do that work in their neighborhoods with the school. Yeah, that's our hope, I think, in the Vineyard, is saturation as much as a huge, magnificent moment. People that are faithfully walking in the ways of Jesus. It's a big deal, man. It's a really big deal. I'm all
in on that. Let's do it.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't really have another plan at this point. So this is all I got. So I'm committed. Well, I'm really grateful for you giving me time. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your leadership, not just in your church, but in the Vineyard as a whole. You've chosen to step up and serve, which is always more work. But I'm really grateful, Marshal. Truly.
Oh, it's been such a joy. Thank you so much for the time to hang out today. And I love being a part of this thing.
Yeah, well, it is our family, and we're like any other family. We got messes, but I do love our family. I'm really grateful. Yeah, appreciate you, man.
All right, thank you.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.